Our next session is called Mythology via Women, and it's now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. First, we have Madhavi Mahadevan, who is a book critic as well as the author of several children's books and 2 collections of short stories. She has written 2 novels based on the epic Mahabharata, The Countess, and the latest one, Bride of the Forest, the untold story of Yayati's daughter. Thank you for joining us, Madhavi. Next, we have Rashmi Terdal, who is a journalist working with the Times of India. Besides socio-economic issues, she is passionate about Kannada poetry and fiction. Her English translation of celebrated Kannada novelist S.L. Bhairappa's latest work, Uttarakanda, is a retelling of Valmiki's epic Ramayana from Sita's perspective. Thank you for joining us, Rashmi. Samhita Arni is the author and illustrator of the Mahabharata, A Child's View. More recently, she collaborated with artist Moina Chitrakar on the New York Times bestseller Sita's Ramayana. Thank you for joining us. And finally, to moderate this session, we have Mani Rao, who is the author and poet, who is an author and poet. Her latest nonfiction, An Anthropology of Mantra, Experience Among Tantrics, is Living Mantra, Deity, and Visionary Experience Today. With that, before we get started, if there are questions for our panelists, feel free to use our Q&A section. And if anyone in the audience would later like to pose questions, you can feel free to let us know, and you can use this mic to ask questions. So with that, over to you.
Thank you.
Mani.
Thank you. Very exciting discussion, hopefully in the next half an hour to 45 minutes today. Obviously, it's not mythology by men, because the premise is that mythology is already written from the point of view of men or written by men, which is why we're going to sound out the idea of mythology by women. Not just necessarily women as the authors, but women as the characters. Mythology that centers more on, the woman's point of view, and so on. To start the discussion, what I'd like to do is invite each of the panelists to talk a little bit first about what it is that led them to their particular focus in stories. In Madhavi's case, the latest book, the new book that is out, which is Bride of the Forest, is also on the Mahabharata, but it's on another female character, interestingly called Madhavi. In Sam's case, she's kind of ditched the Ramayana, which is a sudden departure from it after all these years of having associated her with Ramayana, to see that she's moved on south. Silapatikaram, right? In Rashmi's case, of course, it's interesting that now, after the last book that you translated, now you've got Bhairappa's Uttarakanda, and we'd love to hear how that happened, or how it came upon it, and what is your particular interest or affinity that led to it. If we can start with you, Madhavi.
So the question is, what
led you there?
Yeah, what led me to Bride of the Forest?
Yeah.
Well, the short answer to it is that I have always looked at the Mahabharata as a sort of cultural glue, So even if it is men telling Mahabharata, we've had enough of that. But women telling Mahabharata is retelling, but also reinvention. Now, why should this reinvention be there, and what form should it take? Is a question that has always it's the first question that I try to answer when I look at a theme. And in this case, though I had read the story about 20-25 years back, was the first time when I encountered this character and her story, and subsequently did read it again and again, it wasn't something which enthused me. It was so bleak, the story of a woman's exploitation, and retold the same way again and again, that I said, it didn't even interest me. But it so happened that I came across a few, I was doing some other research, and then I came across this issue of, surrogate mothers. And it's a very contemporary subject. And because of IVF, we do have female, surrogate motherhood. And then we also have this entire thing of commercial surrogacy. So it's a full-fledged business, and India is one of the countries which is the hub. I mean, besides Thailand and I think maybe Ukraine or whatever. But this is a place, this is the go-to place if you want to solve your infertility issues. Now, infertility issues exist in Mahabharata throughout, and in the Ramayana perhaps too. So it was a very good way to fuse a modern concern with an ancient idea, which, because when I checked this out, I found that this is probably the first case of commercial surrogacy, the story of Madhavi. So it was an easy way to bring these two ideas together. That's what led me to the book.
In the story, the character has children with four different
Kings,
fathers.
Four different fathers.
Yeah.
That's right. And later you find it in the main Mahabharata, Kunti having sons from four different gods.
Except in this case, it's commercial. The person
there is a clear-cut transaction.
It's a transaction where, in order to receive something, he gives this woman to all these guys.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, Sam, what about you?
Just to pick up on some, so this is my latest book, The Prince, which is oddly enough not about a woman. It is about a prince. But what led me to this and why it intersects with women is something that, just to pick up on something that Madhavi said, is how do stories resonate with us today? And what about these mythological stories intersect or reflect concerns that shape our world today? The Silapatikaram, which is the text that I found particularly fascinating, is about a woman, an ordinary woman's quest for justice, in which she challenges the might of the state. She challenges the king herself. She speaks truth to power. And in the course of experiencing great rage, destroys and lays waste to this entire city. After 2012, after Nirbhaya, I myself felt a lot of rage. I myself felt a lot of anger. And I was drawn to the story of the Silapatikaram. The idea that also anger, which is something that I had repressed in myself, could be transformative, because we see traits as gendered. We see anger as masculine and gentleness and compassion as feminine. And I don't think that we should draw these distinctions. I think all of us should practice these traits in our lives, regardless of our gender. But what I particularly found interesting about the Silapatikaram, as I went deeper and deeper into it, this is a story about a common woman asking for justice from a king. Ironically, it is written by a man, and it is written by a princely man at that, a man who comes from the ruling class, who chooses to leave that position, renounce his claim to the throne, become an ascetic, become a monk, and write an epic about a common woman's quest for justice. This was powerful, and this happened millennia ago. So I really feel in today's age, it's not just about women challenging the system. It is about women and men both challenging the system, because the system doesn't benefit any of us. It excludes us regardless of gender. There are ways in which men are disenfranchised by our ideas of masculinity today. There are ways that women are too. And we have to do this together. There is no, in some ways for me, there is no distinction of gender. And I really feel like the Silapatikaram brings me back to that.
Yeah, actually, to go a little bit another step forward in the same theme, for you, you've already explored a similar kind of sentiment with your tellings of Ramayana. And however, with the story of Kannagi, you seem to have touched upon a new vein almost in our cultural memory. Was it because you were tired of Ramayana and or was there something specific about the story of Kannagi that led you into it? And eventually you actually focus more on Madhavi in the story rather than on Kannagi. So that's interesting. Did you ditch the Ramayana because you were overkill maybe, or I don't know?
I had written 2 books on it already, so overkill had already happened.
It was just
done.
Okay.
I don't think the world needs another book from me on the
You were looking for a new story, huh?
I was looking for a new story, and I was also intrigued by this. We talk about the hero's journey, we talk about epics. These are always, and I have also written something that is called The Prince. So I'm also falling into this category in some ways. But we are always writing stories about men who go out there and fight great battles and fight great victories and change the world. That is the hero's journey. That is what Campbell calls the hero's journey. But we have forgotten that there are a number of stories about women doing the same thing. And the Silapatikaram is one of these. And if you are Tamilian, there are a whole host of stories that do this. There is the Manimekalai, there is the Kundala Kesi, there is the Neela Kesi, there is the Silapatikaram. How many of you in the audience have heard of these stories? I'm seeing heads shaking around. We haven't, and we have forgotten these stories, but they are part of our legacy. They are part of our heritage. And I think to go back to them, to rescue these stories as well, is to understand what kind of roles, to bring back to Madhavi's point, what kind of roles, what kind of ways can we shape ourselves, what kind of identities can we forge through connections with the past, that can help us take us into the future.
Yeah, thank you. So I think this idea of rescue is very interesting. Rescuing a different point of view, rescuing a less known story, an unheard voice, the untold story in so many different ways, whether they are already in familiar tales or those that need to be refreshed and brought back to the surface. Rashmi, in your case, could you tell us a little bit about what it was? I mean, Uttarakhand seems to be, such a, if you'll excuse, such a basic kind of theme. What was it that got you there? How did Bhairappa's Uttarakhand come in contact with you? Yeah.
See, I, like many children in India, I grew up reading stories from the mythology. Then my special interest was in the Ramayana. And as a school, when I was in the school, I also wrote a state level examination and I won a gold medal for it. And all those things happened. Later on, but somehow, and I realized that whatever I had read were the abridged versions, which were even mellowed down by the Bhakti Pantha. This Bhakti Pantha, what they do is in their religious zeal to keep the image of Rama intact, they have further subdued the voice of Sita. And even in the original Valmiki Ramayana, the voice of all female characters is very subdued. Of course, they speak in one or two places. But then, for example, Kaushalya, she launches an attack on Dashratha. How can you do this? You are not a proper husband, you are not a good father, and all those things. So there we may feel that there is some voice given to the woman. Even Sita speaks, maybe when in the battlefield, she said, Rama, how can you say such vulgar things to me, like a vulgar man says to a vulgar woman? How can such indecent behavior? I didn't expect it. My father, he didn't give me to you, expecting this kind of low behavior from you.
Are you saying this is in the Valmiki Ramayana?
It is in the Valmiki Ramayana.
Yeah, so
all these things are there in the Valmiki Ramayana. But still, what I felt was this: we may feel, when we read this, we may feel that, okay, woman is self-willed, she is courageous, she is speaking. But if you read the complete Valmiki Ramayana in its original, it is in 24,000 verses. The Valmiki Ramayana. 24,000 verses. Most of it, Valmiki has used for two things. One is describing the nature and the landscape. Hundreds of shlokas, they go waste in that. Secondly, it is all about glorifying the men and putting women in the bad light. Okay, so this is when I read this, I realized that we really need a different approach to this, where the woman's voice must be really heard. Because here, what has happened is, though women speak in some contexts, they are very passive. They are just like an emotional instrument in the hands of the poet to show that he has just used that to they are just enacting some emotions to add color to the story. But finally, they are not independent. They don't have their own voice. They are still instruments in the hands of men who define how women should behave. So when I read all these things, I was thinking this Ramayana needs to be retold in an altogether different perspective from the women's angle. And when I learned that the Uttarakanda by S.L. Bhairappa, this was written originally in Kannada by S.L. Bhairappa, who is a stalwart of Kannada literature. When I came to know that Uttarakanda will be released, in fact, I was among the first buyers. Even before the shop was opened, I was in front of the shop, early in the morning on the release day, because there was a solid reason for it. Because earlier he had written Parva 40 years ago, which is a reinterpretation of the Mahabharata. And believe me, it is an amazing book which looks at Mahabharata from Draupadi's and Kunti's and all the women's angle. So I was sure that in Uttarakanda by Bhairappa, I was going to find the answers for all my questions. And I knew that finally justice will be done to Sita only by Bhairappa. So I was so convinced. So that is the reason I was among the first readers. I went and bought his book. and all other things followed.
Interesting. So also, I mean, I think this sort of puts to rest that whole question about is it a fight between boys and girls, and it's not, because evidently you're saying Bhairapa is sort of the advocate of the Sita's voice. And we have also just heard that the Valmiki Ramayana has a lot of the point of view of women, except the narrative focus is more on the what men do.
Yeah.
Like in the Uttarkanda, Valmiki Uttarkanda, you know, it's all about Indrajit and the fights and the wars, and until about halfway through, the whole Sita's exile doesn't happen. Whereas Bhairappa's Uttarkanda actually begins with the whole breastfeeding scene of Lava and Kusha.
Yeah.
It begins in the ashram where Sita is staying, etc. It just picks up halfway through the story and completely forgets about sort of the past wars of what happened in Lanka, right?
It's with retrospective effect. That is how we should read Uttarakanda also.
Yeah.
For example, Uttarakanda is the last book. It is the 7th and the last volume of the Ramayana. But if you read only Uttarakanda as a standalone book, you really need to read the entire Ramayana from the beginning. So that backward reading is required. So what this Uttarakanda offers is, it gives you the last part with the retrospective effect.
Yes.
So you will get 2 in 1 in the same book. You don't have to go back to the volumes of the Ramayana.
But it doesn't begin like that. It sort of shifts the
That
focus
is
to
right.
the point of view of the women. You also hear about Lakshmana's wife and, all the women's points of view on this. But do you think that there is an existential difference in how you view the story because you are women writing the stories? Or do you think that you're attracted to tell these untold voices regardless of your own gender? In this case, I mean, there are many other writers who are working with mythological fiction, male writers also, who are writing about female characters, and they are also putting the focus on it. Like Bhairapa is a good example of that. What I mean is, in terms of plot, in terms of character, even in terms of style of language, do you think that the books are different because you're women writing these books, or is it just your interest? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. So
is it your life experience that makes it different, or your style, or what? I mean, please do tell us. Yeah.
Well, I think it makes a difference. I mean, as a woman, there is that angle to it, that your gender does influence your perspective to some, because it is related. After all, I mean, you choose stories or you connect with stories which have got women somewhere in them. The reason why perhaps I connect better with the Mahabharata is because, as Rashmi just said, the women in the Ramayana are, they have very small and idealized spots, or they are vilified in some way, or whatever it is. But in the Mahabharata, they are in the gray zone, just like the men. This is the difference. So to me, the women in the Mahabharata are definitely more interesting, though there are women in the Ramayana too who interest me, like Ahilya, for instance, or even Tara, very interesting woman. So that perspective is definitely there, that you approach, it's easier to write. Also, I think men have kind of told their stories, and when you see male characters don't interest me that much, because there's nothing to explore. They are out there, their point of view is out there, whereas women have always been silent, and it's interesting to find out what their stories could be.
Okay, so that's your take on it. Yeah. Okay, thank you. How about you?
So I think that the first thing that I kind of knew about myself was that I was a girl, and so whatever stories you listen to or you read after that, you identify automatically, subconsciously, whatever, with the character that you're told you are. So if I read Cinderella, I will look at Cinderella as a model rather than being, Prince Charming as a life model for myself. I'm not going around there being Prince Charming to other people. I wish I was. But this is what I'm trying to say is that we model ourselves a lot on the characters of the stories that we are told, especially as young children when we are told fairy tales, when we are told myths. So I think it's I would like to ungender that experience.
Yes.
But I think that is the reality of what we're brought up with. As I grow older, yes, my experience of being a woman definitely comes into play, into writing, into what I'm attracted to, into the fact that I respond to the Silapatikaram from the place of Nirbhaya and not from something else. yet at the same time, I feel like I would like to transcend that. I don't know how to explain that
Yes.
paradox and that conflict.
Yeah.
But that is where I'm coming from.
Yeah. Rashmi, do you have any comment on that?
See, I would like to continue with what I was speaking earlier.
Okay.
Because I just made a couple of notes about how Valmiki is more obsessed with the duties of women and their conduct. I'll give two examples and I will see how, I will tell you how Bhairappa has dealt with it. See, I'll give you some examples. The Queen Kaushalya, she tells Rama, it is from the queen. She says, a woman's first recourse is her husband, her second is her son, her third is her kinsman. She has no fourth in the world. So Valmiki makes women completely dependent on men and he doesn't give them any independence. Then, in another context, Dashratha tells Kaushalya, my lady, a woman who has regard for righteousness should hold her husband, whether he is virtuous or not, to be a god incarnate. You have to consider your husband as a god incarnate. Then, in another context, when Kaushalya asks Rama that first she tells her, she pleads with him not to go to the forest, but when he insists that he will go, she tells him, then take me also. I will also come. I don't want I don't want to stay in the palace. You take me along. Then Rama advises his mother. He says, for a woman to desert her husband is wickedness, pure and simple. You must not do so, and you must not do such an ignoble thing. Not even you should not even think about it. So what he says is, for a woman to desert her husband is wickedness. My question here is, if you are able to advise your mother that you should not abandon your husband, then how can you abandon your own wife later when she's pregnant? So these are all men-centric, statements in the Valmiki Ramayana. But what I like the most about Bhairappa is, see, in the end, in Bhairappa's Uttarakanda, Sita walks out of the Dharma Sabha. She says, though Rama asked her to come back and live with him in the Ayodhya, she rejects that. She walks out of the Dharma Sabha. She will never return to Ayodhya. And Rama exercises his rights as the father and he keeps Lava and Kusha with him. But rejected by his wife, rejected by his sons, his health starts deteriorating. He feels psychologically, physically very low. He stops eating and he stops his public appearances. And once he tells his minister Sumantra, and this is where I feel, in such instances, this is where I feel that Bhairappa has done justice to women. See, Rama tells he is very low, his health is sinking. He tells his minister Dashratha, a woman rejected by her husband can swim across the ocean of life, but it is very hard for a man rejected by his wife to leave. This is how Bhairappa has reversed it.
Interesting. Actually, to pick up on this point, in Bhairappa's Uttarakanda, where Sita takes to farming at the end, and the whole psychological aspect that you talk about seems to come out a lot. And similarly, in your stories also, you seem to give reasons for why somebody is what they are. In this case, very interesting turn happens when Rama is gone. And then Sita is furious that how dare he leave me as a widow. And then in order to punish him, she makes sure that she is gone within 10 days. So these are very interesting sort of readings about characters' actions.
See, basically, Sita is not a man-hater. She loves Rama immensely. She had immense love for Rama and also she has a great affection for Lakshmana. Only thing is she realized that the power that is associated with the kingship has changed Rama. And if you look at Rama, the flaw with his personality is he's very keen on honor and shame. These two things bother him all the time. What people will say about me? If I do this, what will be the public opinion? Right from the beginning. For example, when he is told to go to the forest, he tells Lakshmana, see Lakshmana, it is not a big thing for me to use my arrows and take control of entire Ayodhya. I can defeat all the people who stand against me. But what will people say? This is not dharma, this is not righteousness. So he's always concerned about that. So this is the whole thing which makes other people suffer. Even when he abandons her, when he banishes her to the forest, She's again concerned about the public opinion. So she realizes that because of this, he has rejected her. So it becomes, she has to place her dignity and self-respect above her love. She
Okay,
has to
so a
do
lot
it.
of explanations and like postscript to a
So,
story
yeah.
and a revision on it
So,
based on a perspective.
Yeah. So when he dies, she cannot bear that grief because she doesn't really hate him. That is the thing.
Sam, anything you'd like to talk about here, particularly the courtesan's role just fascinates me in your, but first tell us about the psychological underpinnings of your story.
No, I just wanted to respond to like something
Okay.
that Rashmi said,
Yeah.
because that really struck off some thoughts for me. And when she was talking, particularly, I think about that where Sita can cross an ocean, but Ram is stuck and he's not free. It really reminded me very powerfully of Volga's liberation of Sita,
Yes.
which is that moment of being banished from Ayodhya is a transformation for Sita and herself, and that is the liberty that you can take with that story. But another thing that Rashmi said to me that really kind of said that really sparked off a thought is that we do have to also rewrite the men in these stories, because these stories are about leadership, because these stories are about power, and if they continue to be handed down the way they have been, we just replicate those paradigms. We have to also not just rewrite the women in these stories, but we also have to rewrite what the men are possible of doing, or at least question them and challenge them. And I think what the translation you've produced has done that. But that's also an important part of retelling these stories.
No, by contrast, Madhavi, when I was reading your book, I have to tell you that I just from time to time just had to keep shaking my head, like, what are these piteous lives of all these women? Because everybody in all the characters, they're always completely trapped in their roles, and they keep on bemoaning the fate of women throughout. It was only as I kept reading it that I realized that, the main character, who's basically, she's, I would say, raped, or she's violated by four different people, or rather she's given away as part of a transaction to four different people. And the rage that actually was not really expressed by her in the book, I felt I was feeling the rage, So is that like an intended thing that you sort of like repressed it in the book, and you think the readers will come out saying, what is this story?
No.
Reject.
No. I didn't intend it, but if it had that effect, I am gratified. It's far, because eventually you want to move the reader. That is your intention all along, but it's not possible. You can't control it. The thing is that since I've been writing on the Mahabharata, and it's like I said, it's a gray world, but it is also the world as it is, the messiness of it, and when I address it with my modern sensibility and all that I have inside me, I have to make a conscious decision to not judge the characters. I have to understand each one's motivation, whether it is Yayati, whether it is Galav. I mean, Galav was really hamstrung. He had to give that Guru Dakshina to Vishwamitra from wherever. Otherwise, there was no option. There was nowhere for him to go. And this was the world at that time, that what your Guru asks, you have to produce. Today, we can say, sorry, I couldn't do it, teacher, and all that, let me go off. And he might just say, okay, carry on. But then it was like, once you give your word, you have to do it. That's it.
Is there a male character that you actually liked in your book?
I like them all. Because they are characters in the book. They are, and I have to, I liked Yayati. I thought he was very colorful. I liked his father Nahusha. I thought he was, I have to like all my characters. I cannot hate a single one. So I approach it like that when I am writing, I cannot, whatever be the story. And the thing is, like we were just discussing about how the Ramayana is and how Valmiki wrote it. It just struck me that the Mahabharata is probably not that, because this is one character, the character of Madhavi, who precedes Sita and Kunti and Draupadi and everyone else, who makes a choice to leave when they are honoring her by, telling her there's a swayamvar being held for you and we would like to marry you off properly and everything. And all the kings have come. And she says, she just flings the garland away and says, well, I don't choose any of them. I choose the forest. And she makes her own path. So I think that...
Yes, that was very striking. Actually, in all your books, in yours, the heroine goes away into the forest. In yours, the namesake Kannagi, the queen, is in the river where the one breast she's found. The body is found with one breast. In Bhairappa's Uttarkanda, Sita goes and lays down in the furrow and has a self-willed death. In all these cases, and actually, I think in each of your books, there's been, of course, I know yours is a translation, but in each of these three books, there's been some discussion about the loneness of the woman. In Madhavi's book, a discussion about the self and the happiness of the self and the woman as being happier alone with herself. In your case also, the whole story of the courtesan, Madhavi, etc., and all the various dependencies and intricacies in relationships with these men, at the end of it, sort of, a lot of times it breaks through that spirit of, wanting to be free of this. Is that true? You think nature ultimately is the recourse?
I'll take the question first.
Yes, okay.
So the thing is that at the end of it, she emerges, there is this whole thing about the renewable virginity, this is the boon that is given to her, which you find. But throw that out of the window. Let's not judge it the way we see it now. And look at it that at the end of it, she is free of everything, but she's also inviolate. So much has happened to her. She emerges undamaged. She's completely whole as a character. So virgin to me is not the physical term, but virgin is, being able to walk away, being able to see it all, being able to go through it all. It talks of a certain kind of resilience, which I think we can only aspire to. Yeah.
Any comments?
That's
Sam?
very interesting, Madhavi. I never thought of it that way because I'm also connecting it with this Christian idea of virginity.
Yeah.
And then on a metaphorical level, what that means is just that your spirit is whole. You need nothing.
Yeah. You need nothing. She walks away. I mean, you know the story. So she just walks away and she sort of rises above this entire thing, So that is a virgin.
Yeah, she chooses not to go with it's the men are sidelined at the end, right?
No, they are not. You look at the end of the novel.
Yeah, she says, no, I'm going to go into the forest. And later her sons join her. Correct?
Her
Her
son-
children,
yeah. All those sons come back to
Yeah.
her, but look at the end. At the end, it is her action that returns Yayati back to heaven. He's been thrown out of heaven.
That's right. He doesn't go far enough with just his children's actions. She has to give her
So it's the first time.
residual karma to him. Karma to him,
They always say the sons are needed to perform so that the soul goes to heaven. But here is a daughter and a daughter's sons. So that's also a first, and that's why I think the Mahabharata is probably a little more fair compared to the Ramayana.
It's interesting to note the point of virginity being evoked, because if you look at the character of Draupadi, when she's married to the Pandavas, she has to spend 1 year with each brother. And at the end of the year, she has to enter the fire to become chaste again for the next brother to come in. So for me, the idea is, why has the sexual violence or sexual desire, conversely, being repressed when it comes to women, but it's openly explored when it comes to men? For example, if you look at violence, sexual violence, just giving a few examples out there. If you think about Sati, if you think about, I don't want to be scandalous, but Saraswati, when you think about a lot of these characters, women who are portraying roles, they're either given a position of a particular role to play, but their inner turmoil in terms of sexual violence being oppressed upon them, or their desires for sexual liberty not expressed in mythologies. I just wanted to understand.
That's a really great question. And I'm going to be really awkward answering this because my parents are in the room. But I think that we have these models of Lakshmi, Saraswati, so on and so forth. But we also have a Ganga who who dares explore her sexual desire in different ways. We also have the Devadasi tradition. These are just things we choose to emphasize. We have both models present, I think, in our mythic awareness, but it's just choosing what we choose to emphasize. Madhavi, in my book, she is a dancer. She is the forerunner of all of the Devadasi cult. She is the descendant of the Apsaras. So we do have these different things. We just put them in a hierarchy according to what we assign value to. We think the married woman is superior to the single woman. I think that, for me at least, is part of that. That is why we have those holes. But
no, I think what Sam has said is absolutely the whole thing. Probably, I mean, I don't get this feeling when I read the Mahabharata that this hierarchy was actually there, because Madhavi in the Mahabharata is honored. She is the maiden who was responsible for the salvation of kings. It's a special place of honor she's given. There's nothing about the bartering, the reality as we see it today. The fact that there is such a thing as surrogate motherhood, and all the stuff that it involves, and we don't want to look at that. But in the Mahabharata, she's honored. Kunti also never suffered. I mean, her sons were demigods, and Draupadi, interestingly, that you bring her up, but she is one of the names that is mentioned in the shloka, which is said as a prayer, the Panchakanya, about the Panchakanyas. She is one of the names. So, in fact, all the women in that, Ahilya and Tara, are all women who have had, multiple relationships with men. So it seems to me that that world was perhaps a little less judgmental than ours. I don't know.
And just to add one more thing, you spoke Lakshmi and Saraswati, but Parvati or Uma is a very different kettle of fish altogether. She's a married woman who does enjoy her desire in the course of her marriage. I mean, Kumara Sambhava's epic is all about that. So there is also that alternate model.
Yeah, I would like to add a small thing. Even in the Mahabharata, this Sharmishta, who is, you must be knowing it better, Sharmishta, when Yayati, she directly approaches Yayati, saying that I want a son from you.
Yes.
She's not his wife, but she boldly goes and tells him, I want a son from you. So this is how it is. But as I said, the later versions, they have modified it to suit their ways. And this exact, how women express themselves in the original epics has been subdued in the later versions.
We'll take a question from the audience online. Pravina Argula asks, there are so many different translations of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and they all vary in views. Which of them do you think are closest in translation to the original epics?
Closest in translation.
Closest in translation to the original epics.
About Ramayana, I can say.
Please.
See, as the question is right, there are so many versions, but the 24,000 verses of the Valmiki, they are available in Hindi translation by the Gorakhpur publication. That is one thing. And in English, this a team of translators by Robert Goldman and Sheldon Pollock, they have translated the original Ramayana. So they are available both in Hindi and English.
Can I also, for the Ramayana, I really like Arsha Satar's translation. It's kind of abridged, but I think it's a really powerful one. For the Mahabharata, I really like the J.B. Van Buitenen translations. But I also resist the idea of the original. I believe that these stories have been retold, and they are inherited legacies that are passed on to future generations. We all have the liberty to retell them in certain ways.
I know there were a few other hands. Please.
Thank you. It was a great discussion. My question is touched off by something that Rashmi said, I think, about women are only tools in the hands of man in the Valmiki's Ramayana. And the thing that's always struck me and a question about it is that the idea that women don't have agency in those stories. But to me, isn't it Kaikeyi's action and her agency that really gets everything going? And similarly, isn't it like a kind of parallel? It's when Sita desires that deer that the story really takes off. So that's agency, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the agency. That is true. But then you know what? Rama's ultimate view about it is that all the things that followed were because Sita insisted on the deer. she doesn't take it, he doesn't take kindly to it, Later on, he mentions about it. He says that because you were after me to catch that deer, all those things happened. You were abducted, you had to come all the way to Lanka, my reputation was spoiled, I have to gain you back. So all these troubles were caused because of you, because you desired for that deer. It was such a simple thing that she wanted that little deer to keep with her. And in Bhairappa's Uttarakanda, he also says that her desire for the deer was not a magical or golden deer or anything. Sita was childless for 11 years. So she wanted to have that little one with her, which will give her some comfort in the loneliness of her forest exile. But for the same thing, the whole thing is projected as if all this happened because Sita wanted that deer. So this is sheer injustice because everybody is prone to mistakes. But the entire thing is blamed on a woman who just had a simple desire. So that is why I said these women, they don't act. They just have a voice, they have been used. Plus, what we really require is agents of action, agents of societal change, which is not there in the Ramayana. I hope that answers your question.
And to just add on to that, I mean, the Ramayana, the gentleman in the red jacket earlier asked a question, was talking specifically about sexual desire, but all kinds of desire being problematized here. Surpanaka is sexual, but the other kinds for power, for wealth or artha, all of these kinds of desires are being problematized.
We do have time to take one more question from the audience, if anyone. Please come.
My question is to Rashmi ma'am. You rightly said that only Bhairappa can do justice to Sita. So that is, as a reader, as someone who is interested in mythology and who has read so much, I can, I do not judge, Bhairappa or anyone. But that also comes with certain male privilege that Bhairappa is giving justice to Sita. My question is, you as a female writer, when let's imagine that this is your original book and not Bhairappa. When Rashmi brings justice to Sita, what are the calibrations that she need to make to fit into, to be accepted, to be her Uttarakanda to be accepted in the audience?
Yeah, to be honest, I totally agree with the portrayal of the characters by Bhairappa. That is why sometimes I also feel that because of my involvement in the book, plus the way I have come to appreciate the portrayal of Sita, I don't think I would have written it differently. I totally accept, I go by his portrayal of Sita, his portrayal of Urmila, the way he has given voice to them. So that is what I said in the beginning itself, that this was my expectation from Bhairappa and this is what it is. So I don't think see, from writer to writer it varies, but I don't disagree on any major points in this book. So
thank you. We have talked adequately about everything. Thank you everybody for being here and thank you for...
if you give me just half a minute,
please.
Okay. I would just like to read one small passage from this book, which is very relevant. Because when a woman is raped or she's molested, we always blame and shame the victim. Okay, this is what happens in most of the cases. So here in this case, Sita thinks about this particular issue because when she is held captive in Ravana's palace or that Ashokvana, she's under constant fear of being molested by him. And she's thinking, why should I have this constant fear? Because she thinks that I'm fearing about the consequences. If I'm molested, if I'm raped, there will be consequences. So Bhairappa writes here, which is Sita's soliloquy. She says, why does a woman feel ruined when the purity of her body is lost? Isn't the body mere matter as compared to the mind, intellect and soul, which carry life itself? Is it not possible that the purity of the mind, intellect, soul and one's life as a whole remain intact even when the body is violated? Furthermore, when a woman is violated, shouldn't the man who assaulted her incur the sin of his crime? Why is the victim condemned as a sinner? So, I like this particular point because this in summary says the whole attitude of the entire system that we have taken down from generations, the blaming of the women for so many reasons, victim naming, shaming. So I think from this angle, if you say, then we think that it should be more and more interpretations of the mythology
From the women's
from the
point.
women's angle.
Great way to end it. Thank you.